Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. How can one recognize that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is truthful and trustworthy? This is an interesting question. I suppose it's coming from a perspective of trying to understand theoretically or trying to understand in order to explain to somebody who is not a Muslim. Of course, a Muslim, there would be no Muslim who would question the trustworthiness of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wa ala alihi wasallam. But be that as it may, for an outsider to understand the trustworthiness or the great character of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in this context of ours, 2024, 1446, it's somewhat a bit of an intellectual exercise, because an outsider would be told the Prophet ﷺ is trustworthy, the Quran says so. But if it's an outsider, they wouldn't necessarily accept what the Quran says. They're not going to, at face value, just say, well, okay, if the Quran says so, then khalas, it must be true. If they're not Muslim, then that wouldn't be the case. If they are Muslim, there's no doubt about it whatsoever. Innaka la'ala khuluqin azim. Allah says to the Prophet ﷺ, indeed you are on a tremendous standard of character. So again, for the non-Muslim who does not necessarily accept the truthfulness of the Quran, one approach that I would encourage here is to look at history. And when looking at history, you don't need to turn to the Muslim sources of the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. If you don't trust those sources, you can find any sources of history that is objective and truthful, even among the enemies of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so the Jahili Arabs. There you may still find, while they disliked what the Prophet ﷺ had brought, there isn't a single case, historical evidence, to suggest that any of his enemies sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or any of those who didn't like him, who didn't like his message sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that they were able to validly point a finger at him and say that he was untrustworthy or he was a person of poor character. In fact, the opposite is true. We find that throughout his life, alayhi salatu wasalam, even among those who truly despised his message and his mission, one thing that they were never able to combat or defend was the fact that they were dealing with somebody who had impeccable character. He was known, even before Islam, before the advent of Wahi, I should say, he was known to be Al-Amin. He was known to be the trustworthy one. Because the Arabs, they understood that of all the people in Mecca, they could trust the Prophet ﷺ the most with keeping their valuables safe for them. And there's even archaeological evidence that I've seen to show that in the house of Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, they had a special space where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would actually keep the valuable commodities of others. So that in and of itself is a testament to his trustworthiness. That was before the advent of Wahi. And then after the advent of Wahi, once his message started to be public, first among his tribe, his family, his immediate friends, and then beyond that to the broader tribe, the broader community, and then the Arabs and the world in general, still we find that throughout his life, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and after his life, no one was able to point out any blemish in his character or any blemish in his truthfulness or any blemish in his trustworthiness, even among those who detested him and who hated him. Yes, people accused him of other things like soothsaying and black magic and poetry and having stolen the ideas or the words from other religions in a sense. All of those arguments, they tried to justify what they were saying because they couldn't make sense of this miraculous transformation of the Muslims. They couldn't make sense of this Quran that was being revealed that was more beautiful than anything they've ever been exposed to, even though they were the pinnacle of linguistic and philological beauty. So they understood language, the Arabic language, better than anyone else, and they were masters of the language. But the Quran gave them no such opportunity to turn around and say, well, what you've got is actually good. No, the Quran silenced them entirely. Try to even produce a verse like this. Try to produce one surah like this. You cannot. You'll never be able to do so. So for that reason, they needed to make sense of it. So they came up with theories as to where this is coming from. But even though they tried that, we don't find an occasion where they turned around and said he was a liar, he was a person of bad character, he was a person of bad habits, he was untrustworthy, he was a cheat, he was not true to his word. Nowhere did you ever find such an accusation laid against Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, why are we looking so much at the words of his enemies? Simply because if there was anyone who would point out, if there is, for us as well, if there's anyone who's going to point out our flaws and our faults, you can be rest assured that our enemies are going to find that. People who dislike us, they will find something. And when they have to resort to matters that are ridiculous and completely untrue, that everybody can see, and it's purely theoretical, that's when we know that, look, if there was something that was actually truthful here, they would have mentioned it. They don't mention it. They had to make up other things that were just downright ridiculous. So therefore, we can take that as a testification of his character, sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. And again, that is for the outsider's perspective. For the Muslim who accepts that the Quran is the kalam of Allah, there's no need to even ask the question. We would say simply, well, if you read the Quran, Allah will tell you, Allah will inform you of the character of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Barakallahu fikum.
La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.